knocked over all the books. Whoops! Well, hello loves, it's Tatiana Volk here, and today I'm going to be doing the January monthly reading wrap up. I ended up reading 22 books in January, so we have quite a lot to talk about, so let's get into it. So before we get into the books, let's do some quick stats just to give you an idea of how my month was. So first off, I read 22 books. I have all of them here except one, which I ended up reading on Kindle, and I didn't like it enough to buy a physical copy. I ended up reading one book by a LGBTQIA+ author, 6 books by BIPOC authors, and 16 by white authors. 5 of the books had a BIPOC main character, 4 of them had BIPOC side characters, and then 11 of them, all of them were white or NA. I didn't read any that had LGBTQIA+ main characters, which is very sad. I read 4 that had LGBTQIA+ side characters. 4 of the books were fantasy, 6 were romance, 8 were thriller, 10 were horror, and then I ended up giving out 11 5 stars, 3 4 stars, 6 3 stars, 1 2 stars, 0 no stars, and 1 that I didn't rate. For the whole entire month, I read 6,099 pages, and I participated in Books and Lala's Buzzwordathon and Gabby Reed's Winterween. I also started my own TBR game this month, which I will have linked down below for January and February, which I just shot and just went up earlier this week. So those are all of my stats. Anyway, let's get into the books. If you want to learn more about the books, I do talk about them a little bit more in depth in some of my other videos. I will have them linked down below. Okay, so I'm actually going through these in the order that I read them. First up, we have Dream a Little Dream, which I picked for the Books and Lala's Buzzwordathon. The word of the month was dream. I didn't know what to pick, and this was fairly cheap, so I just ordered it real quick. It's a YA about basically a girl who moves, I think, to like England or something, and she starts at a new school. There's these popular boys that like everybody likes and this, that, and the other, and she ends up having a dream about them where she has some like interaction with them, and the next day one of them says something that she had mentioned in the dream, and now she's trying to figure out what's going on, and she gets kind of sucked up in their witchy world and dream world and all of this stuff. It was very interesting. I did enjoy it despite it being a YA, which I'm not the biggest fan of. I have nothing against, but you know, I'm iffy about the topics in general. But I ended up giving this 4 stars. It's the first in a series. I don't intend on continuing the series, but I did enjoy the book. Next up, we have These Violent Delights by Chloe Gong, and this one I was so hyped for. It's a Romeo and Juliet retelling. I ended up getting this book in my Fairy Loot box, and I absolutely just love the idea of it. It's in the 1920s Shanghai, with the 2 rival families being gangs in Shanghai, and it just, I don't know, I just loved the idea of it. It has a fantasy element and all kinds of cool things, but I didn't love the execution. I did still enjoy the book quite a bit, and I do plan on reading the next one, but I did only give it 3 stars. I feel like this might be a book that I enjoy the second time around, also with a little bit of skimming through some of the less interesting parts, but I love the premise quite a bit. I just didn't love the execution as much as I wanted. Next up, we have Lies She Told, which I believe is a psychological thriller. So this is a story about a writer who is writing a thriller novel and notices some eerie similarities between that and the mysterious disappearance and then the body found of her husband's work partner, who he then gets arrested for suspicion of being involved in his death, and she's trying to figure out the connection and all kinds of things. So this one was interesting. I think it was good and it was well done. I didn't like it because of a lot of the themes in it. So I actually ended up giving it 2 stars. Like I was so over this idea, and I don't think it had anything to do with the story. There's just like, she's writing a novel about a cheating husband or something like that. And I was just like, I'm so tired of cheating relationships, so I wasn't into it. Okay, so the next book is Stephen King's The Shining. I had watched the movie when I was younger. It was one of the only Stephen King movies that I enjoyed. I tend to not be a big fan of the endings of a lot of the movie adaptations of his books, so I wasn't sure if I was going to like this, but I absolutely loved it. The writing was phenomenal. The story was sort of what I expected, but with some twists and turns or differences from the movie, which I enjoyed. There were some things about the movie that I liked more and some things about the book that I liked more, but it was just a really fun experience. I ended up giving this 5 stars because I liked the writing so much, and now I'm looking forward to reading more Stephen King. Next up, we have The Haunting of Bryn Wilder by Wendy Webb, and this was part of Winterween. This was the buddy read, and it was also for the prompt, a book with haunt in the title. This was about a woman who has, I think her mother just passed away, and she's trying to kind of start fresh in a new environment, so she goes to this small town that her friend's in so that she can just stay there for a while before she goes back to work the following. She's a teacher after summer is over. And while she's there, she ends up meeting a cast of characters in like the bed and breakfast that she's in, and there seems to be some sort of haunting happening there. It's a paranormal romance. There are plenty of issues with this, but I really enjoyed the writing. There were some kind of nonsensical things that could have been fixed, but like I said, I still enjoyed it. I will say I didn't love the romance aspect of it. It could have been stronger, but I did like kind of some of the spooky vibes, and I enjoyed it so much. I gave this one 4 stars, and I loved it so much that I ended up buying 2 more books by Wendy Webb to see if I would enjoy the writing in those, and that maybe she would do even a better job. Looks like I got a little bit out of order. So after The Shining, I actually read the Kindle version of Night of the Mannequins, and I was sort of expecting something else, so I didn't really enjoy it as much as I would have liked, but I did like the idea of it regardless, so I ended up giving it 3 stars. It's one of those things that I feel like if you knew what it was about, you might be more interested in it, but I can't tell you that because it would spoil it. So I don't know how to talk about this. It's a novella. It was really short. I think there were some interesting things about it. I just wasn't into it when I was reading it, which was very unfortunate. And then the book after that and before The Haunting of Bryn Wilder was actually Everything I Never Told You by Celeste Ning. And this book I ended up giving 5 stars. It's a story about a Asian American family in like the 70s or something when interracial relationships was highly frowned upon, and it talks about the family dynamics after the eldest daughter goes missing and is then found dead, and it's kind of just them going through the grieving process and communicating with each other, and it was just beautifully done, and I don't know, I was just emotional, and I thought it was really good. Wasn't thrilling or scary or anything, but it was good. Next up, we have Wilder Girls by Rory Power, and this is a weird book, and I loved it. I ended up giving it 5 stars. It is about a boarding school that, I guess it's a boarding school, that's like located on an island, and all of the girls end up getting infected by some sort of virus or something, and they end up with all of these weird kind of mutations. Like our main character, one of her eyes is like shut somehow, and another one has like bones out of her back, one has scales. Like it's all kinds of like weird creepy things, and they're trying to figure out kind of like what's going on. They don't get a lot of food. There's like this fighting aspect. There is a lesbian relationship, and I don't know, it was weird, it was interesting, and I was here for the ride. I enjoyed it. Then another 5 stars for me was A Monster Calls. I had never read this before. I believe it's beautifully illustrated. It was interesting. It was heartfelt. It was emotional. This is a story about a boy whose mother is sick, and he's having these nightmares, and a monster from one of his dreams comes and kind of helps him through his problems that he's going through and trying to figure out like, why is this monster here? Why does he need meet him? Like, what is he afraid of? What is he dealing with? And it's very emotional, and it was beautiful. So I cried. Like several times. Next up, we have The Walls Around Us by Nova Ren Suma, and this one was interesting. I ended up giving this 4 stars. You get multiple perspectives, one being at a female juvenile correction facility, like a female young jail, and then the other being by a dancer who was part of some sort of crime or incidents that led her friend to go to that female correctional facility, and it's you trying to figure out what actually happened, how she was involved, why the other girl went there, what's happening at the place. There's some sort of like paranormal aspect to it. There's sort of mystery. It's not spooky. It's just you're trying to figure out like why everything is happening the way that it did, and I enjoyed it. I enjoyed it quite a bit. Like I said, I gave it 4 stars. Then another 4-star read for me was You by Caroline Kepnes, and I both really enjoyed and hated this book at the same time. Like, I was on the fence of should I give it 5 stars or should I give it 4 stars. I think I settled on 4 stars because I actively hated it, but I think that was part of the point. But for me, I was just like, I can't, like, it was hard. It's from the perspective of a stalker who becomes obsessed with a woman and is trying to do whatever he can to get her, to be in a relationship with her, to have her. You just experience that. Some parts of it are slow, some parts of it are vulgar, some parts of it are just really uncomfortable, but it was also really interesting, and I found myself at times rooting for our stalker guy and then being all like, what the hell? Why am I rooting for this guy? Which I thought was fascinating. So interesting read, also kind of difficult. Next up, we have After the Woods by Kim Savage, and this one I felt like had a lot of potential, but there were a couple of things about it that I was just like, about, and I ended up giving it 3 stars. It's a story about a girl who ended up escaping a attack. So she was basically abducted, and after running around in the woods for like 2 days, she manages to escape, and a year later a body was found that was connected to the person who abducted her, and it's like, oh, that could have been her. Also, and she actually saved her friend and took her friend's place, and she's trying to figure out what's happening with her friend and why her friend is acting weird and what's going on. There was a lot going on, a lot of things I was really interested in, some things that just didn't carry through in a way that I would have liked. There was plenty of things that I was like, this is really cool, and then it kind of just like fizzled out or died or wasn't followed through, which was a little bit disappointing, but I enjoyed it for the most part. 3 stars. Then I ended up getting Trap 3 Little Pigs by Kyle XM here on YouTube, and this is the lyrically accurate version to the YouTube video, which I will have linked down below. I thought it was absolutely hilarious and wanted to support him. I will say I am super disappointed that he doesn't have any information about the illustrator, so do better. Give credit to the artist. But other than that, I love the idea of it. I think the illustrations are gorgeous and the video is funny, and it was a fun read that I technically read several times, but I only counted it as once because it's such a quick read. Because yeah, I was trying to see if I could trap wrap it. So yeah, I didn't rate this because I didn't know what to rate it, so this is a no rate for me. Next up, we have my first Riley Sager book, which is Final Girls. Final Girls is about a girl who survives a massacre, basically. A bunch of her friends get murdered. She's the lone survivor, which automatically puts her in the Final Girl clubs, which is basically just a club of 3 girls who all survived similarly horrible events where everybody else died except them. And that happened like 10 years ago, and in present day, one of the Final Girls ends up dead and the other one ends up on her doorstep, and she's trying to figure out if they're in danger, what happened, and also trying to figure out what happened to her 10 years ago. So there's these multiple timelines going on. It was really interesting, and I actually gave it 5 stars. I really enjoyed it, and yeah. Next up, we get into the picks for the tabletop TBR that I ended up doing for January. I started these halfway through the month and I still managed to complete them all. Starting with Pride, which is a Pride and Prejudice retelling by Ibi Zoboi. I listened to the audiobook, which was narrated by Elizabeth Acevedo, who wrote With Fire on High. She is an amazing narrator, and I think she did Ibi Zoboi's Pride, the book, justice, and I really enjoyed that. That being said, I didn't love the book in the end. I thought it was great having this Afro-Latina representation. It's in Brooklyn, like the Bronx, and you know, they're high schoolers, and I loved kind of seeing the spin that she chose to do for Pride and Prejudice, but I just felt like there were a lot of places where it kind of felt flat, and it was a little bit too focused on some of the high school-y aspects of the characters to be really interesting to me, because like I said, I tend to not like YAs that focus too much on them being young. So I enjoyed it. I think I gave it 3 stars. Another 3 stars was The Winter People. I was actually expecting this to be much better than it was. I don't really scare very easily, so I will say none of the books that I've mentioned so far actually really scared me, and this one was recommended by Gabby Reads as kind of a scary book, so I was excited to give it a shot, and unfortunately it just didn't do it for me. I did get heat sick while I was reading this, and I think I may have missed a little bit of the information, so that may have tainted my experience, but I don't really think it did that much because it was only a small part of it, and I put all of the pieces together after the fact anyway. So I don't know, it was cool, it was interesting, I liked it, I gave it 3 stars, but I didn't love it, and it wasn't as spooky as I wanted it to be. Then I ended up picking up another Riley Sager. Since I liked the last one so much, I picked up Lock Every Door. This one is about a apartment sitter who is at this really fancy, expensive place, getting a super good deal, getting paid good money, and who is kind of putting aside some of the weird rules that she has for this apartment sitting job, and then one of the other apartment sitters goes missing, and she's trying to figure out what's happening and what's going on with her and what's going on with the place and why the rules are the way they are and things are the way they are. And it was a good read. I really enjoyed it. I ended up giving it 5 stars. I wouldn't say there was anything particularly phenomenal about it, but I enjoyed it regardless. There were a few moments that I even felt a little bit like on edge, so that was a nice experience, but I don't really think it was that scary regardless. Again, on edge for a little bit, so that was nice. Then I ended up picking up Alcatraz from the Inside, which is a book that I ended up getting in 2019 when I went to visit Alcatraz for the first time. And this is a true crime novel written by one of the former inmates, Jim Quillen. Basically, it was about his life and how he was introduced to crime and the prisons that he went to, and then a good chunk of it was about Alcatraz itself and kind of the horrors of Alcatraz and one of the famous escape attempts and being a part of that and kind of what it was like being somebody on the inside and things that you don't hear otherwise. I think he did a fantastic job. He tried to not be biased, although obviously there was some bias in it, but I think he did a good job, and it was very educational, very interesting, and most importantly, very thought-provoking. So I ended up giving this 5 stars. I really, really recommend it, especially if you visit Alcatraz, because it was really interesting being able to think of the stuff that he was talking about as having been there. Next up, we have Vicious by V.E. Schwab. I've had this for quite a long time and wanted to read it really, really bad. And then when I started it, I almost DNF'd it, not because I didn't want to, like I wasn't enjoying it, but because I just felt like I wasn't in the mood. But fortunately, I pushed through and I got really into it, and I absolutely friggin' loved this book so much that I like really want to break my spending ban and buy the second book in the duology. It's a fantasy book, one of the few fantasies that I have on the list, and it's about two guys who were friends and were interested in learning about basically superhero and superpowers and things like that. And they discovered that to get superpowers, you would have to have a near-death experience, and they end up trying to do that so that they could get superpowers, and they are successful in doing that. But they have a huge falling out, and one of them ends up in jail, and the other one, you know, ends up wherever, and 10 years later they are now like enemies, and there's this kind of like confrontation, and it's just really interesting, and I like the characters, and I'm not much for like superheroes and superpowers and stuff like that, but I still absolutely adore this book. I think V. Schwab did a great job, and I can't wait to read the next one. And then if you've seen a couple of my weekly vlogs, you would have seen that The Visitors was on my weekly TBR for a couple of weeks, I think in a row, and then I just completely took it off until I picked it for one of the prompts. And this one was interesting. I didn't know much when I went into it, so I don't know how much I want to say, but it's basically about a woman who, I want to say she's a little bit slow, maybe. I think she has some developmental issues. It kind of implies that. And she doesn't kind of process things the same way that other people might, and she had kind of a sad upbringing and didn't have a lot of friends, so she ended up staying with her brother, and it's kind of about these visitors that are in her house that she doesn't really want to pay attention to and is trying to ignore, and you're like learning about her life and what's going on with her. I will say that it was very drawn out. I didn't enjoy most of the beginning part, and then it got to an interesting part and I was pretty invested. I don't know how I necessarily feel about the end. I don't love it, I don't hate it, but I think I ended up giving this 3 stars. I did enjoy it. I felt like it could have been better. It was mostly like about this girl's sad upbringing, which I wasn't really into. Okay, next up we have Love Boat Taipei, and I did give it 5 stars. This was an amazing read. I really, really enjoyed it. It's about a girl. I think it's the summer before she goes to college, and her parents basically want her to be a doctor, and she wants to be a dancer, and she doesn't know how to really say that to her parents. She wants them to be happy and be proud of her, but she also wants to do something that she loves, and she's really excited about doing dancing stuff the last summer that she can before she becomes a doctor. But her parents end up sending her to Taipei so that she can learn a little bit more about her culture and learn Mandarin and, you know, just be a little bit more involved in her culture. But on her trip, she ends up dealing with like scandal and issues and rebellious stuff and trying to figure out who she is, and there's a little bit of romance and self-discovery and drama and all kinds of stuff, and it was a great book. I really enjoyed it. It was emotional. I could totally understand a lot of the things that she went through. I respected the way she responded to some things. Yeah, I think it was a good book. I highly recommend it. Okay, so we made it to the final book of the month. That is The Vanishing by Wendy Webb. As I mentioned before, I enjoyed The Haunting of Bryn Wilder. I thought there were some issues, but I felt like she would do a great job doing a spooky, like a haunted house type book, and I was right. I absolutely loved this book. I think I gave it 5 stars. Now, I will say there are issues with it. I had the same problem with the romance that I did with the last one, but I think this did a much better job kind of flowing through and having things make more sense. Like there weren't weird, I don't know, tactical errors that I got in the last book. So highly recommend this as being a better Wendy Webb book. But there were similar writing styles and the similar spooky, haunted house, paranormal, a little bit of romance, not great romance. I'm gonna be honest with you, I'm not a fan of her romance, but I love the spooky haunted house vibes. I don't think it was scary. I don't think it was super thrilling. I kind of guessed a lot of the like mystery aspects of it, but I still really enjoyed it, and it was what I was looking for. So if you are interested in that, you know, spooky paranormal, it doesn't all make sense kind of stuff, this might be for you. All right, so that wraps up this month's review. So these are probably my top 5 out of everything. For most people, I would suggest these. Anyway, that's pretty much it for this month's wrap up. Please let me know if you enjoyed this. What would you like to see more of? What did you like? Please thumbs up if you liked it. Do leave a comment, that does help the channel, and subscribe if you haven't already, if you enjoy book stuff and art stuff and witchy stuff, all of that fun stuff. And I will see you in the next video. Until next time, bye!